Refugee Action Coalition says refugees abandoned by Australia in Papua New Guinea are experiencing another round of distress. Ian Rintoul says refugees in Port Moresby haven't been paid their food allowance, on top of being threatened with eviction and no access to health services. Mr Rintoul told Lydia Lewis there's a real risk vulnerable refugees will be booted on the streets with no support.
People haven't been paid their food or income allowances, so it looks like the same. We've had this situation periodically over the last few months, but the Nomura is the company that is responsible for paying the food allowances and their income allowances, and that just hasn't happened this week. So there's another round of distress, particularly coming on top of the threats over the last few weeks, threats of eviction, and the fact that things like electricity and gas and Wi-Fi have been progressively being cut off in their accommodation. So nothing's resolved. It does the secret deal between the Australian government and the PNG government. It does look like the money has run out, and it's the squeeze is being put on the people who are most vulnerable.
Can you tell me more about that deal and why you are saying that it looks like the money has run out? Do you have any more indication as to what's happening and why?
Well, we don't know the terms of the secret deal. That's one of the problems that there have been now as a result of the exposés of the fact that services have been cut off and that invoices from refugee service providers have not been paid. The Chief Migration Officer in PNG actually came out and said that the Australian government has not been providing the money under the agreement. As since last night, the Australian government actually admitted that the last payment it made was in July 2022. So that's more than a year ago, before the Australian government had topped up any money, according to on their own admission now, and that went rather further than what we've been able to get information previously. But it's very obvious that the money has run out because there is now, you've got service providers that are owed millions of dollars. The medical service provider PIH in Port Moresby has told the guys that they are now cutting services, and they expect they may even cut total services, particularly mental health services. Look like they're being cut totally by the end of the year. That they're owed millions of dollars.
What is a realistic outcome that could immediately alleviate pressure for the providers and also those stranded?
Well, the immediate thing that could be done is for the Australian government to bring them to Australia. We know that could be done. It could be done overnight. There's only 62 people left in PNG. It wouldn't be a big issue at all for the Australian government to decide to bring them back to Australia. Papua New Guinea now is actually threatening to terminate their humanitarian program, as they call it.
What would happen then to the refugees? Do they not have rights to certain support and measures?
No, they've got no rights at all. It's an extraordinary situation. It's very, very akin to kind of official people trafficking, in my opinion. The fact that you can have people who have been determined to be refugees that have been owed international protection, and yet the Australian and Papua New Guinea can simply decide, where they're going to be shoved to. Whether they've got at the moment they've got no right to reside in Papua New Guinea. That's determined totally.
Where would they be shoved to? I mean, if nothing happens here, if Australia doesn't bring them to Australia or doesn't pay up, what would happen?
They'd be shoved onto the street. I think that's what you've got refugees now in Port Moresby who live with their bags packed in case they are, suddenly evicted. There's already one guy who's living in a car in Port Moresby. So that's been the problem right from the beginning.
Can you just explain how severe the mental distress is, I mean, I've heard from someone else of one person who can't even do anything themselves, can't even make phone calls, and is just lying down all day. So can you just explain your understanding of the severity of their health?
It's difficult to describe. It's distressing to describe. But there's more than one person that's got, the withdrawal syndrome that we've seen in other detention centres run by Australia, and particularly from Nauru, which resulted in many people, including children, being brought from Nauru to Australia because they suffered that withdrawal syndrome.
What is withdrawal syndrome?
It's the person you described, people who won't come out of their room, who won't eat, who are incapable of making phone calls or answering phone calls sensibly, who simply withdraw from engaging with anybody. There's more than one of those people in Papua New Guinea who don't come out of their rooms, who rely on other people in their housing blocks to get their food, to bring them the food. For example, you've got other people with very distressing. This one guy who was 6 months in PIH, the hospital I mentioned before. They were then discharged from the hospital, but within a few days you had the same problems of people talking gibberish, looking like they were kind of hallucinating and able to engage with people.
You've mentioned now that these health services and mental health services will be plucked away from these people.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's already been problems with that at the level of at which PIH has been willing to service the refugees. It seems because the funds have dried up, and they've not been willing to actually provide the services that they had in the past. The offshore detention, the use of Nauru and Papua New Guinea was always a convenience for a very well developed government to push onto countries that were compliant because the Australian government effectively bribed them. The only alternative is to end the offshore detention arrangements and to bring the people in Papua New Guinea to Australia, where they can get the medical services, where they can have end the uncertainty that surrounds their situation in Papua New Guinea, where they can stay safe and secure, and if they want to go to a third country from Australia, they can. But it's quite clear that they've got no secure future in Papua New Guinea.
In a statement, an Australia Department of Home Affairs spokesperson says PNG took over the exclusive independent management of individuals remaining in PNG in December 2021. Australia paid PNG a one-off finite funding, with all payments made to PNG in the 2021 to 2022 financial year.